Giles Vernon had had a busy morning. Being a plutocrat was not all fun and games. One had to be sure that everything was running smoothly on the island. The government and the police could be relied upon. Its ranks were filled with weak-minded and corrupt men looking to enrich themselves. Members of opposition parties were open to bribery. Vernon had also spoken with a few small business owners on Fanaboa, and felt like he didn't have anything to be very concerned about. In his mind, he owned this tiny country for all intents and purposes. The mere utterance of his name inspired fear and respect. Surely no one who knew what was good for them would dare to go against him. Unfortunately for Giles, someone on his staff, a rare person with a conscience, had decided that his employer had gone too far. This individual fed information to British intelligence, letting them know what one of their citizens was up to. This information proved to be very interesting to certain members of the Secret Service, who happened to be active in the Pacific region. Fairly high-ranking military officers were tasked with responding to the situation on Fanaboa. British General Tompkins had to take a risk of sorts. He had to make contact with his counterpart, General Mackay, head of Fanaboa's defence forces. Had Vernon gotten to the armed forces on the island too? Whether he had or not, HM Special Operations Team needed Mackay to cooperate. Things had the potential to get very messy. The call was made. Susan had watched over the previous 2 days as girls were taken from the blue padded room. They would be gone for about an hour or so before coming back. Same blank expression. Occasionally a voice would come over the speaker and order the captives to begin exercises as directed. Walter had come in person once and told everyone to get on their hands and knees. She had clicked her fingers several times and vocalized a few strange noises as well. She petted some of the girls as if they were dogs, telling them that they were good bitches and she would always look after them. Finally, it was Susan's turn to be taken. As she left the room, she heard the guard, the orderly, say, "You, and you, come." She couldn't turn back to see who would be joining her. They were taken through the garden and marched into an opening which seemed very grand indeed. A short walk down the hallway led to a red door. The orderly gently pushed it open and ordered them into what appeared to be a theatre of some kind. Several people sat in attendance close by. Bauer and Walter Susan recognized. But there were 4 others. One of these began to speak. "Hello, little playthings. My name is Daddy Giles, and we're going to have some fun, children. You and you," Susan saw he was pointing at her, "walk together and face each other." Susan turned and saw Fiona standing before her. Giles ordered them to kiss, and before Susan could do anything, Fiona was forcing her way into her mouth. The younger woman's tongue found its way over Susan's teeth and gums before pressing its way to the back of her throat. Walter ordered a stop and came up on stage. Bauer and Vernon looked at each other puzzled. Walter looked deep into Susan. She held the sides of her face firmly. lifting her chin. She held her for a good few seconds. She let go and then ordered Susan to get on her knees, which she did immediately. Fiona was commanded to turn around. Vernon then issued the command to eat her arse like a good little girl. As Susan thrust her tongue into Fiona's anus, she felt like she might be overcome with shame, yet she knew that she couldn't let these people know that she wasn't under their spell. It could mean her death. She could feel her face becoming more red as she licked and probed Fiona's tight hole. Susan was told to express gratitude for being given the privilege of rimming such a beautiful hole. She attempted to say thank you very much, Daddy, with her tongue still inside her brother's girlfriend. Susan was greatly relieved when she was commanded to stop, but stayed within herself. Now, from behind the curtain, Marcus was revealed by the orderly who brought them here. He was commanded to get hard fast, which he did. Fiona was taken away by the same orderly, and Susan could feel her heart pounding hard and fast. Marcus was then ordered to stand in front of her. Susan, still on her knees, knew what was coming. She felt as if she might die from the excitement building up in her chest and between her legs. She was ordered to suck, and suck she did, with childlike enthusiasm. It was pure ecstasy. How she had longed to have her brother's firm member in her mouth. She wanted to look up at him and make eye contact, but had to resist. She wanted to masturbate badly, but couldn't. When Bauer ordered a stop, her heart sank, as she had to let go of his beautiful cock. But she was not down for long. Susan was told to get on her hands and knees, and Marcus was commanded to mount her. Susan's pussy was already wet. As Marcus slid his 7-inch unit inside, she let out a loud groan. This made Vernon, Bauer, and Walter sit up straighter. Marcus was directed to pound her as she deserved. Walter looked at Susan as she was being rigorously fucked, and could tell something was wrong. The signature blank expression had been replaced by a beaming smile, and her eyes were rolled back in her head. Evelyn called a stop to the proceedings and sent Marcus away. Susan began to laugh and fell on her side. Walter could see that Susan had came quite heavily. Walter then turned to Bauer and said, "This one needs to go back to processing. We've fucked up, Hans." Vernon was stone-faced. He told everyone in a firm tone that he wished to be left alone. The room emptied rather swiftly, leaving just Giles with his thoughts. Tompkins' misgivings about General Mackay were still at the forefront of his mind on the day of the operation. During phone conversations between the two, Mackay would often excuse himself when difficult topics surrounding possible corruption on the island came up. He didn't seem keen to talk about members of the government in Fanaboa, who were believed to have been a big help to Mr. Vernon and his project. Nevertheless, the mission had to be carried out. Human lives were at stake, and Tompkins wanted to see Giles Vernon and his servants brought to justice. 12 of the best special operatives would storm the compound at 10 a.m. local time. Fanaboa troops would surround the area, cutting off any possible escape route. The security gate was blown 5 minutes behind schedule due to technical difficulties. However, they did still appear to have the element of surprise on their side. 2 guards began firing on the operatives from exposed positions and were quickly cut down by machine gun fire. As they entered the building, another guard sprang into action, wounding one of the operatives in the leg. The guard attempted to take cover behind a wooden door, but this provided no shield, as he was cut to pieces by returning fire. At the same time as Tompkins' men made their way through the faculty, Fanaboa defense forces were picking up Vernon's agents as they tried in vain to escape over the walls and down the slopes of the compound. The lead operatives, Jennings and Hodges, entered what seemed to be a laboratory of sorts. In a chair behind a desk and computer sat a middle-aged man. He was shaking, sweating, and blinking rapidly. All of a sudden he shouted something in German and pulled a handgun from the side of his jacket. Hodges shot him 5 times in the chest, blasting him off his chair to the floor. From down the hall came a call from another operative. Jennings went to investigate. He was shown into a small lounge where a woman in a white coat lay dead on the floor. Her eyes were rolled back in her head and her lips were pursed together. The men suspected she had poisoned herself. A couple of minutes later, 3 of the men entered what looked like a small theatre. No one was in the audience. On the stage was a single naked female on her knees, staring blankly ahead. She kept repeating, "I'm a good girl, Daddy," every few seconds. The men were deeply disturbed and didn't know how to proceed. Jennings merely told them to stay put and await further instructions. It was Jennings himself who found the blue padded room. He counted 8 naked women and 2 young naked men. They all appeared to be in some kind of trance. For the time being, he left them as they were. He would have to contact Tompkins and let him make a decision later. Hodges had a shock and almost opened fire when he pushed the door open to one room to find a woman masturbating and groaning in pleasure on the floor. Over and over she moaned, "Marcus, Marcus, baby." Where was Giles Vernon? The men searched the compound from top to bottom for several hours, but could not find the vile plutocrat anywhere. Some of the men speculated that he may have a hidden panic room somewhere. Others said maybe he had already escaped using a secret tunnel network. Whatever the case, he was not to be found. Tompkins didn't know what to make of all this. He still felt he couldn't trust Mackay, but was not in a position to be making accusations. He had no evidence of foul play when it came to the Fanaboa general. They did manage to agree between themselves that this should be kept quiet for security reasons. The former captives would be flown out to a military medical facility on another Pacific island about 60 miles south. The victims of Giles Vernon were given water and clothes. Back at the medical facility, they were all given sleeping pills on the advice of the chief doctor. When they awoke, more than a day later, all of them seemed to be suffering from memory loss and confusion, and hunger. They all told a similar story. They could remember being out somewhere with a tour guide or guides. Then there was a big chunk of information missing. This was naturally distressing. The truth of what happened was revealed slowly and tactfully by the doctors and nurses who had been briefed. This was traumatic for the people involved, who had a hard time processing what had occurred. Some were very angry. Others went into a state of denial, as is common. One of the women was different from the rest, though. She didn't appear to be as traumatized as the others. Although this experience had clearly taken its toll, her mood was considerably more upbeat than the others. This woman was delighted to be reunited with her brother and 2 other travelling companions. After 2 weeks at the facility, the victims were allowed to go home. However, they were told that they should not talk about what happened to friends and family, and certainly not to the press. Tompkins was not satisfied with the way the mission turned out. As far as he was concerned, the core goal was to capture or kill Giles Vernon. But they couldn't find the bastard. Where could he be? Another headache was the dead girl they found in the fridge, and the fallout from that. The parents had been informed of her death, but details had not been forthcoming. This was national news in France. Their government demanded answers, and the situation was threatening to turn into an international incident. The agents they had detained had proved useful in getting a clear picture of what the compound was for, how daily operations were carried out, how the actual hypnotism worked, etc. But none of this information brought Tompkins closer to Vernon. However, the more the general thought about it, the more he was convinced that this evil man would show up somewhere. The British government gave the order to seize the assets of Vernon. His old business partners were called in one after another for questioning. The police understood that they were dealing with a very intelligent individual who would not be easy to catch. 6 months after their ordeal in paradise, Marcus and Fiona were looking forward to the big day. After returning to England, they had separated briefly by mutual consent. After a few weeks, they both realized that their love was too much to throw away. They passionately reunited and agreed to get married later that year. With 3 days to go before the wedding, the happy couple invited a few close friends and family over to their new flat for drinks and light snacks. Susan and Jennifer were in attendance, as were Fiona and Marcus's parents. Susan and Jennifer seemed to be attached at the hip these days, and some of their friends speculated about the possibility that something romantic was going on. In truth, it was not. Jennifer knew where her best friend stood on the issue and respected her wishes, even though she still yearned to be with her intimately. Susan herself had become increasingly frustrated since her return home. Even though she had a fantastic new consulting job in the city, and even though her romantic life was certainly not boring, she had many one-night stands with men she'd meet in upscale bars, she longed constantly for that forbidden thing, a thing she had now experienced. Her own flesh and blood had been inside her. She couldn't talk to anyone about this, and now her baby brother was getting married. Susan was unhappy about this, but she would adapt. At least, that's what she told herself. Susan found herself thinking back to that compound, that facility on Fanaboa. Clearly, there was something to the whole hypnosis business. If she could discover the secrets of this practice, perhaps she could have baby brother again and again. On the dark web, one could learn about dark arts in privacy. Susan would set about learning new skills and techniques from people she would never meet. She knew it was wrong, but she was driven by the perverse hunger to have him again. He would be her puppet sooner or later. The better part of her was held at bay by her deviant shadow self.